All right, we are live, and I'm Douglas, and today I have with me Kaylee. Welcome, Kaylee.
Hi, Douglas. Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. And we were just chatting a bit earlier about your fascination and just love for digital health and how it can create more access, which I think is really fascinating because of in the world of facilitation, we're always thinking about how we create affordances for people, how we access, how we bring people in, and so it's the same kind of love, the same kind of passion focused on the healthcare kind of sector or industry. So I'd love to hear more of your thoughts there, and also just where this is headed. Someone who's kind of been in it more closely probably has some interesting insights as to what's developing and what we can expect. Uh-oh. Kaylee is frozen. Oh no. All right, listeners, let's give a few moments to see if Kaylee is come back to life here. Well, I'll fill you in on a few things while she is maybe refreshing her screen and her browser. But she's the vice president of strategic partnerships at Senvelo Health, and previously director of external innovation at Johnson and Johnson, which we spoke about her role there at length on my podcast, and there she is. Excellent. I was just filling them in about
About our great podcast. I'm so sorry.
yeah,
I'm in the cabins and thought I had great Wi-Fi when we tested, but here we are. So bear with me.
all good.
And yes, I got most of your question, Douglas, and lead up to about the connections around digital health and access and how that's very similar in terms of a lot of the work you do in facilitating. So yes, completely agree. It's something that can be applied to so many industries and so many similar pain points across the ecosystem.
Yeah, and so where I went from there, I guess when you were frozen before I realized you
Oh,
were
I looked
frozen.
great.
Yeah, it was perfect. It was like a nice shot, and looked like the headshot just came up. So
Perfect.
so I was just curious, as someone who is actively working in the space, thinking about strategic partnerships in a health organization, and then involved in external innovation for so many years.
Yep.
Clearly, you're tuned to where things are going and what's coming in the future. And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on what can we expect? What's around the corner? What are you excited about?
Yeah. So, as I have really spent the last few years in the startup ecosystem, have just a passion and a love for disruptive innovations. I sort of thought it was all about being in the startup space, right? That's where all the ideas were coming from. I was at big company for years and so grateful for that experience, but I thought they were a little slower moving and maybe would be catching up down the road. The biggest thing I've realized, and it's a little bit of like this duh moment, but is how much we all have to work together in order to truly achieve those breakthrough ideas at scale. So in digital health, you see all these amazing companies, mental health, overall well-being, diabetes care, really changing the face of what it means to have and live with some of these conditions. They're coming up with disruptive ways to engage patients, telehealth, leveraging technology and AI. But then, in order to scale, in order to tap into massive patient populations that are raising their hands, they should and need to provide with partner with the larger org. So you talk about strategic partnerships. That's been a lot of my focus is how do you connect the dots? How do you make sure we all work together
Mm,
to achieve this greatness and to both take the idea and then scale it in a way that is then affordable and accessible, not just to, a small number of patients or consumers, but really to the breadth of the world that payers or providers can offer. So it feels a little bit like, of course, but it was a big aha for me, is just how much we have to work together across the ecosystem to really achieve those goals.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated about it, the concept of ecosystems, and how if we really take a step back, we zoom out, we can see that there's lots of different maybe components or capabilities across the landscape that if we bring them together and we
Yes.
work together in unison, that we can all rise together versus this kind of more competitive approach.
That's exactly right. And that's a lot of what I've focused on in the partnership space in mental health specifically, is how do you think about partnerships, not just as a way to find more patients, but also to support those patients in their journey, right? So the mental health company I'm with covers everything from mild and moderate stress, anxiety into depression. But frankly, there are some conditions that aren't appropriate for our model. And so it's
Mm,
our job to find patients those resources. And sometimes that means referring out, which means we need a theoretical competitor to play with us, but really not a competitor. It's about strengthening that user journey. We then also need the buy-in of the providers, the doctors who are seeing these people, face to face on a regular basis. You need the buy-in of the people who are going to pay the bills, the insurance companies. So completely agree. And it's definitely shifted my perspective of, from a more of a competitive you against me mindset to how can we win together. I love that. I completely agree.
so it makes me curious now hearing you speak on this. If you have any tips for those that haven't quite, or maybe dubious, or maybe haven't, like they're kind of maybe curious and they haven't maybe taken the first step because they're worried about how to navigate a conversation with a pseudo competitor. How do you get the best results out of exploring that relationship? And because it requires some vulnerability and it requires a bit of honesty and exchange of ideas that and a lot of trust too. So I'm curious how you navigated that, because that's something we run into with clients quite often.
Yep.
They're wanting us to help facilitate that conversation and create like equal. So no parties like running that conversation, right? And so I'm curious how you navigated that. If you have any tips for folks, because I bet it's pretty scary for many.
Yeah. So listen, I think there's a couple things you can do where, if you're really scared about it, you can bring in, legal things like NDAs. And
Mm,
so, especially big companies, that's probably a good place to start. It will give everybody sort of confidence that we are going to sort of abide by a level playing field, so to speak. That aside, whether it's an NDA or a lot of times I talk about friend DA, but whether it not it's how do you sort of create that level of trust. What I really love to try to carve out is where are our common goals or common opportunities that we may not be able to achieve
mm,
individually. And so a good example in mental health, there's all sorts of great capabilities, content, different integrations that can better the consumer experience. And so perhaps, for example, there is somebody that does meditation better than I do. Do I need to recreate the wheel on meditation and create all that content myself? Maybe, maybe not, right? That's probably not worth my resource or my effort. So, what I really try to find is that basis of trust, whether it's through an NDA or NDA as the first step. Number two, what is that common shared goal? And as part of that, what are each of your strengths? And really trying to find that separation and that white space. And then I think the third thing, and Douglas, we probably talked about this on the podcast, but I'm a big, big believer in clearly identifying goals and expectations.
mm.
So that after the fact, as you're talking about partnerships and you're talking about everybody making sure that they're on the same page, that everybody goes in knowing what to expect. They agree on the goals. They agree on, yes, this is what success looks like. And it gives you a very clear just sort of bar to measure against after the fact. And then hopefully, evolve the partnership and it becomes even bigger.
Yeah, I think that's pretty critical when you're gathering any group. If the expectations aren't clear and you're spending your it's just like a big waste of time. If we just spend so much time together unraveling that confusion around the expectations, and it's even worse when it's not clear that there's confusion. So then
So
you got
true.
people kind of somewhat pushing back, and it's like, why is that happening? And it's all because we didn't set the stage. So I couldn't agree with you
Yep.
more. Like getting clear on the purpose and getting clear on the intentions, and even spending time on what we're not going to do, so we know what's out of
Yes.
boundaries. So that can create a lot of safety for folks that they say, oh, okay, you're not encroaching on any of that stuff. That takes a lot of weight off my shoulders. Like this sounds a lot more attractive now that I know that you're not interested in going anywhere near this because that's my little
Yep.
baby or whatever.
Yeah, and actually, Douglas, to that point, I think a lot of times with these partnerships, with whether it's competitive or not, that ability to clearly define and almost take the baby step, put the toe in the water
Mm,
first is really helpful. Because what ends up happening is people want to have the perfect partnership, the perfect pilot together, whatever it is. And in the pursuit of perfection, you end up watering the whole thing down and it implodes. So, learning your way, doing smaller pilots, exactly that. Hey, we're only going to play in the sandbox here. And then ultimately, and this is, I think, very much packed into what you just said, making sure that those tie back to the strategies of both either divisions or companies. What I've seen a lot of times is that something's really important to one person in the partnership because it's very much aligned to their strategy, and it's sort of a second thought for the other player. And then you get misalignment of goals, of expectations, of the willingness to put in time and energy. So I think that's another thing, is it should really all ladder down from your goals and what you're trying to achieve, and making sure that it's beneficial in that regard as well.
I want to just double stitch on something you just said because um, even though we want the same outcome, we might want it for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so and this gets into this kind of marketing and storytelling, right? If we're talking about this outcome only through the lens of party A's values and interests and needs, then the other party's going to feel they're going to feel disconnected, even though the outcome would benefit. It's the outcome they want. They just don't. It's hard for them to connect to it. And so I think making sure that we really understand that, oh, this thing that we're pitching, this reason for existing or reason for partnering is like that we're pitching is like number 3 on their list. How do we add another bullet point to capture their number 1 so they're now everyone's like really clicking.
Absolutely. So, Douglas, you'll remember I was an external innovation. As you mentioned, I worked for a huge company, and I would go looking for startups to partner with, invest in, as a way to learn and really leapfrog those learnings more quickly than a big company could do it. And it's something I thought about a lot. I would literally write down, as we were talking about deals, talking about structures, I would think about, what are we going to get out of this? What are they going to get out of it? Because you're absolutely right. That's going to leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth. And like I said, back to the ecosystem part, we're all connected, particularly in
Mm,
healthcare, but in many industries. And this notion that sort of the big player is going to be the one that always wins out is not true anymore. And so
mm-mm.
you really have to be intentional and thoughtful and prepared. Completely agree, to make sure the value and the story is benefiting both. And sometimes that doesn't overlap. And so that's okay. And you say, hey, let's find another opportunity when we can. We've built the bridge, we've built the connection. I think the biggest thing is not force fitting it and making sure it really ladders up to what everybody needs. Completely agree with you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you brought it back to the ecosystem because I think that kind of thinking will serve people really well because it's like you know anytime we take something out of its environment and just kind of focus on it and try to optimize it, um, it doesn't necessarily result in the best outcomes, right? We had to think about the whole picture.
Cannot innovate in a vacuum. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. Excellent. Well, I think we just hit our time here. And, I know that you were telling me in the pre-show chat that you're really excited about new opportunities and out there exploring stuff, which is really fascinating to think about, like how the state of the job market these days. And,
Yes.
and starting to work with Harlem Capital on angel investing specifically in the underrepresented founder category, which is, like, I think, a very noble pursuit and very needed. And so I was just reading an article yesterday that the data is actually showing that the VCs have been actually more receptive to investing in Black founders after the George Floyd incident. And it's like, oh, wow. I mean, it's kind of sad that it took that to happen, but I was really happy to hear that the VCs are changing their perspective. So that it seems like people are waking up, and it's great that Harlem's playing a role there and that you're going to be contributing there. So best of luck on the job search. And it's been a great chatting today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I completely agree. There's amazing people in this startup ecosystem that are looking to invest and support and accelerate great ideas, particularly those from underrepresented founders. So wonderful call out, and so great to have time with you, Douglas. Great to see you as always, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You as well.
Bye.